Hi everyone, Dr. Das here to talk a little bit about our week two readings. What you'll find in week two is that things are starting to get a little bit more dense. We talk about some accountability items. We talk about some strategic planning items. We talk about some legislative items, and then we start getting thicker into the nuts and bolts of what makes up school finance. So this is starting to get a little bit more granular as we get into chapters 5 and 6. So starting with chapter 4, what you're going to see and the big things to focus on, aside from the assignment prompt, are going to be looking at strategic planning. And what I want you to do is, my bet is that most everyone has either been a part of or has been accessory to some type of strategic planning. It's not exactly the same as goal setting, but it sort of fits into the mold. So think about if you've ever been on a district team or a school team and the term strategic planning comes up. It's one of those terms that sort of bears an unfortunate name, or it has an unfortunate connotation that goes with it, because there's been, it seems like every few years there's a new strategy or a new component or um, a new focus, and that's not always the case. And remember, as an educational leader, the temptation is going to be sometimes in the back of your head to think, we've done this before, or we're going to try it again, or how am I going to sell this to my staff, or how is this one going to be different? And that's all normal. Those are good questions to be asking, but don't give in to the temptation, the cynical temptation to dismiss it. As an educational leader and as a building leader, as a principal, as a superintendent, as a special ed director, any type of leadership position in a district, we need to be looking at these things through a little bit different lens. So I want you to think about and challenge yourself to push back on if any type of cynicism creeps into your mind about strategic planning, or what a disaster it was when my district went through it, or maybe it went really well for your district. Those things are all good to acknowledge, they're true, but when you put yourself in the position of helping institute a strategic plan for a school or a district, that's an attitude we can't subscribe to. We need to be leading the charge on that, and doing our best to help it make sense to our staff. So be thinking about that and have some of that focus in chapter 4. And then the last thing I'd say about chapter 4 is there's a question about who should be engaged in strategic planning. Be thinking about that too. In public schools, a lot of times what you see is happier staffs when we start talking about decentralized leadership, and diversified leadership. So that means giving some power away to our staff, and really cultivating growth in our staff as well. So be thinking about who should be involved. Who should be involved from one side to the other? Who should be involved? Chapter 5, we're looking at sort of some legal contexts. We're looking for, we're starting to dig into the federal and local roles and state roles in education and regulation of education. So we're really starting to, like, as I mentioned, dive into some thick issues here. So be thinking about parsing out, and this will come up later in the book as well, but the federal government's role in public education, the state's role in public education, and then the local authorities in public education. All very different, all very nuanced, and they can be difficult to understand. And when you look from even just one state to another, very, very different. And that's where you start to see certain states have reputations for really good education systems, and some lag behind. And so some of that has to do with state regulation. Some of it has to do with less has to do with federal regulation, because that's all states need to adhere to that. But then you look at local regulations and the decisions made there, and that can get very interesting. It says a lot about communities and how they feel about education and their schools, and even if it's not an explicit message, where you allocate your funding, and if certain policies hurt a public education system without intentionally doing it, if and it keeps happening over and over, you're sending a message there. So just a couple of ideas to be thinking about as we dig into chapter 5 here. And then finally, in chapter 6, we're really, as I mentioned, digging into the nuts and bolts. We start talking about some taxation and weighing using taxation to fund public education systems versus private contributions. And certainly we have all types of different school systems in our country, and sometimes even just within our communities. And so those can be really divisive, and certainly it's very sensitive. It can be very sensitive, and it depends on the community as always. But where those tax dollars go and where they're spent, and sometimes you'll find that you have packed boardrooms, irrespective of how the district is doing. If a district's doing well, folks want to know where their money's going, especially in current conditions. In 2022, we've got a more divided country, and we have some inflation items going on, and lots of concerns, and sort of some looming items in the economy that nobody really knows exactly what's going to happen here. So it's very interesting as we dig into these things, looking at how schools are funded, the sensitivity there, and who bears the largest load there. Is it the federal government? Is it the state? Is it the local level? And then be thinking about, well, why do some communities, even like-sized communities, end up with more funding to spend than others? And there's lots of reasons for that. But be thinking about those things as you dig in here, and just do your best with the material. I think it's really good. There's a lot of really good items in here. It's relatable. It does get a little bit technical. Do your best with that, and try to maintain the focus that I've sort of laid out for you here, and hopefully that will help you digest some of this stuff. Thanks, and have a great week.